What happens when one ignored phone turns into a lawful goodbye? How far can a husband's quiet restraint go when every missed call becomes evidence? Can a woman who thought a Miami girls' trip was harmless survive the moment her plane lands and reality meets her at the gate? Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. I'm Liora Vale, and I swear I didn't mean for things to explode like this. It was just a weekend trip to Miami. Sun, coworkers, a few drinks, nothing serious. At least, that's what I kept telling myself when Ethan's calls started coming in. 16 missed calls. I saw them all light up on my phone, one after another, while music thumped around me and everyone laughed. I told myself he was being dramatic again, that he'd calm down once I got home. But when I landed, he was standing there at the airport gate, face calm in a way that felt worse than anger. No shouting, no scene, just quiet finality. He said we'd talk properly, and I still didn't understand what that meant. Now I do. People say I should have seen it coming, that ignoring him wasn't just rude, it was proof of who I'd become. But honestly, I still think everyone's overreacting. I didn't cheat. I just wanted to feel free for once, to be the fun one, not the nagged wife. Maybe I went too far, maybe not. All I know is that one silent man can make more noise than any argument ever could. I'm not proud of how it started, but it didn't feel like a big deal then. Just a simple conversation at the kitchen counter that somehow turned into the first crack in everything. Ethan was rinsing dishes, his sleeves rolled up, quiet as always. I told him my office was planning a team retreat to Miami. 3 days. Sun, networking, beach dinners. It sounded harmless enough. He didn't even look up at first, just asked when it was. I said the last weekend of the month. He nodded once, like he was already calculating the costs in his head. Then he asked if it was optional. I laughed and said, technically yes, but everyone was going. That word, everyone, was supposed to end the discussion. He said maybe I could skip it this time, that the company shouldn't expect people to give up their weekends. I told him he didn't understand modern work culture. I said these trips were about connection and branding, about being seen. He said he didn't like how much I cared about being seen. I told him that was easy for someone who hides behind a computer all day. He didn't answer. Just wiped his hands, placed the dish towel neatly on the counter, and said he trusted me to make the right choice. That calm tone always got under my skin. It wasn't anger, it was certainty, and it made me feel small. So I did what I always do when I feel cornered. I made it about freedom. I said I worked hard, that I needed a break, that it wasn't my fault if he didn't know how to have fun anymore. He said he never told me not to go. I said he didn't have to. I could feel it in his tone. He said tones only speak to guilty ears. I remember slamming the cabinet a little harder than I meant to. He didn't flinch. He just picked up his phone, the screen lighting up with a calendar alert. Notary, 11:15 a.m. I didn't think much of it, though it stuck in my head for some reason. Later that evening, I called my sister Hannah to vent. I told her Ethan was being controlling again. She said he wasn't controlling, he was worried. I rolled my eyes and told her she'd gone soft since she had kids. She said I shouldn't risk my marriage over some girls' weekend with office people. I told her she was projecting, that not every woman wants to live under someone else's routine. She sighed, said I was picking fights just to feel right. I hung up before she could finish the sentence. That night, Ethan and I barely spoke. He sat on the couch with his laptop open, and I scrolled through hotel photos on my phone. The resort looked perfect: rooftop pool, ocean view, palm trees glowing under string lights. I imagined myself there, cocktail in hand, finally free of the slow quiet of our house. Ethan looked up once, asked if I wanted tea. I said no, and when he stood, I noticed the faint smell of toner from the printer in the hallway. Probably his work documents, I thought. The next morning, he was up before me. 2 mugs sat on the counter, his clean, mine half full and cold. I checked my phone. No messages, no reminders, just one email from HR confirming travel details for the retreat. I smiled, hit confirm, and sent the payment. When Ethan came back into the kitchen, I told him I'd booked it. He said, I figured. I asked if that meant he was fine with it. He said, it means you've already decided. I told him I didn't want to fight. He said, then don't start one. At work, people were buzzing about the trip. My manager said it would be great for morale, and Rico, the event planner, was already joking about making it one to remember. He was charming in that loud, effortless way that made people lean in. I liked how easily he made things light. I told him my husband wasn't thrilled about me going, and Rico laughed, said men get jealous when their wives glow in the sun. I laughed too, pretending it was funny. But later, when I caught my reflection in the office window, I realized I liked the sound of that, glow in the sun. That night, Ethan made pasta. He always cooked when he was thinking. I said it smelled good, but he just nodded. I tried to talk about the trip, saying it would help me move up at work. He asked if that was the real reason I wanted to go. I said of course it was. He said he hoped I'd prove it. I asked what that meant. He said, nothing. I said, you're being passive-aggressive. He said, you're being defensive. I told him maybe he should try trusting me. He said, maybe you should make that easy. After dinner, I noticed the guest room door slightly open. His work desk had been moved in there, the printer humming softly. I leaned in and saw a neat stack of folders, household utilities, bank. I asked if he was organizing again. He said yes, just keeping things in order. I said he was turning into his mother. He said, maybe that's not the worst thing. I laughed, but he didn't. When I got into bed, I checked my phone again. Rico had sent a message. Got your confirmation. Can't wait for Miami. I typed back a quick same, then deleted the thread. Ethan came in just as I was putting the phone down. He said goodnight, kissed my forehead, and turned off the light. I couldn't sleep. The room felt divided, his steady breathing on one side, my restless thoughts on the other. In the morning, he was gone before sunrise. On the table sat a single sticky note. Bring forms. I didn't ask what forms. I didn't want to know. I threw the note in the trash, finished the cold coffee he'd left, and told myself he'd calm down eventually. By the end of that week, I'd already started planning outfits with coworkers. Matching dresses for the beach dinner, swimsuits for photos. Everyone was excited. I told them Ethan was fine with it, even though I wasn't sure. When one of them joked about husbands being the worst babysitters, I laughed louder than I needed to. I said Ethan could survive a few days without me. That night, Hannah called again. She said, "You sound proud when you talk about ignoring him." I said, "I'm not ignoring him. I'm living my life." She said, "You're married, Lee. That means something." I said, "Maybe not what you think it means." She hung up first this time. When Ethan came home later, he looked tired but calm. I told him I'd bought a new dress for the trip. He said, "You'll look good in it." His tone was too even, too polite. I asked if he was really okay with me going. He said, "If you need to go, go." I said, "I don't need to. I want to." He said, "Then that's clearer." I tried to laugh it off, but something about the way he said clearer felt final, like a door quietly closing. That night, the printer hummed again. I tried to sleep, but the faint sound of pages sliding out kept me awake. I told myself he was just working late, but deep down, I knew he was preparing something. I just didn't know what for. I checked my phone before closing my eyes. A new message from Rico popped up. Sun, sand, and secrets. Ready? I smiled, typed always, and hit send. The air inside the airport felt too cold after Miami. My skin still smelled faintly of sunscreen, my hair tangled from the flight, and my heart thudded with a mix of dread and defiance. I spotted Ethan immediately. leaning against a pillar near arrivals, hands in his pockets, face unreadable. No flowers, no smile, no wave, just stillness. For a moment, I considered walking past him, pretending I hadn't seen him yet, but he stepped forward before I could. His voice was calm, too calm. He asked if I had a nice trip. I said it was fine, just exhausting. He nodded once and said, 16 missed calls. I told him I didn't notice because the music was loud. He said, you always notice when you want to. The drive home was suffocatingly quiet. I kept checking my phone as if someone else might text me, just to prove the world wasn't frozen. Ethan's eyes stayed on the road, expression steady. I said he was making it a bigger deal than it was. He said, you think this is about a call? I laughed without humor, said he sounded like a therapist. He didn't answer. At one point, his phone buzzed from the console. I glanced at it. It just said, reminder, file backup. I didn't ask what it meant. When we got home, the house felt cleaner than I'd left it. Dishes stacked, shoes lined up, even the laundry folded. I tried to joke that he must have gone domestic while I was away. He didn't smile. I asked if he'd missed me. He said, I got things done. I dropped my suitcase by the stairs and went straight to shower, needing to wash off the trip. The water scalded, but I didn't adjust it. I stayed until the mirror fogged. When I came out, Ethan wasn't in the living room anymore. The faint click of the guest room door told me where he'd gone. That night, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw his face at the airport, calm, detached, unreadable. I kept wanting him to yell, to accuse, to react, anything but that silence. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my Miami pictures again. The ones at the rooftop bar, the group shots, the video where I was laughing under the pink lights. I told myself they looked innocent, but under one of the posts, someone had commented, Rico and Liora, Miami's hottest duo. I deleted it instantly. My hands shook more than they should have. In the morning, Ethan was already gone. A note on the counter said, meeting, personal. I stared at the word personal for too long. I texted him, everything okay? He didn't reply. I told myself he was just being dramatic. At work, people were whispering about the Miami video. A coworker grinned and said, you really stole the spotlight, huh? I smiled tightly. Rico winked from across the room, said I'd made the weekend legendary. I laughed too loud and said Ethan was just jealous. Everyone laughed with me. But when I caught my reflection in the glass door, my smile looked rehearsed. At lunch, Hannah called. She asked how Ethan was taking it. I said he was fine, just moody. She said I should be careful, that things look bad online. I told her people were exaggerating. She asked if I'd even talked to him properly. I said he wasn't exactly making it easy. She sighed and said maybe I should apologize. I hung up before she could say more. That evening, when I walked into the house, the air smelled faintly of toner again. Ethan was at the dining table, laptop open, papers neatly stacked beside him. I said we needed to talk. He said, we will. I said, then say something now. He said, I'm sorting. I asked, sorting what? He said, truth from noise. I rolled my eyes, said he was turning into a philosopher. He didn't even look up. I wanted to throw something just to make him flinch, but I didn't. I poured myself a glass of wine instead. After dinner, he asked about the company credit card. I frowned and said I'd used it for travel expenses, as planned. He said, you also used it for 2 dinners not on the itinerary. I froze for half a second, then said it was team bonding. He said, just checking. His tone was polite, but I felt accused anyway. I asked if he'd gone through my bank statements. He said, you left the receipts on the desk. I wanted to scream that he was invading my privacy, but I couldn't, not when I had, in fact, left them there. Later, he went to bed early. I sat alone in the living room, the silence heavier than any argument. My phone buzzed. Rico again. Missing Miami yet? I didn't reply, but I didn't delete it either. Instead, I scrolled through the photos again, hovering over the one of me laughing beside him. I considered deleting it but decided not to. Let people talk. It wasn't like I'd done anything wrong. The next morning, Ethan was gone again. No note this time, just his travel mug washed and drying beside the sink. My own mug from last night still sat on the coffee table, lipstick mark at the rim. I texted him, "You can't keep ignoring me." He didn't reply. Around noon, my manager asked if Ethan was upset about the video. Apparently, someone had tagged our office page in it, and the comment section had turned nasty. I laughed it off, said people needed to get a life, but when I checked, the clip already had thousands of views. My stomach dropped. That evening, I decided to get ahead of it. I posted a long caption about female confidence and work-life balance, trying to spin it into empowerment. The likes rolled in. For a moment, it worked. I felt in control again, until Ethan walked in. He stood behind me long enough to see the screen. Then he said, "Good speech." I snapped the laptop shut. I said he was spying on me. He said, "It's public." He walked away, but before he turned down the hall, he said, "Some people talk their way into trouble. You write yours." I didn't answer. I watched him disappear into the guest room again, that soft click of the lock echoing louder each night. Around midnight, I heard the printer hum. I crept to the doorway and saw him collecting pages, sliding them into a folder. He didn't notice me. On the desk were other folders: Archive A, Household, Bank. My chest tightened. I whispered his name. He turned, calm as ever, and said, "Couldn't sleep." I asked what he was printing. He said, "Clarity." I laughed, tried to sound casual, but my throat felt dry. I went back to bed, staring at the ceiling until morning. Every few minutes, I glanced at my phone, half hoping he'd message something kind, half fearing he'd already decided not to. When dawn came, he was gone again. The house smelled faintly of coffee, same as always, but the warmth was missing. I opened the fridge and saw containers labeled with dates. I'd never seen him label anything before. By the time I got to work, everyone had seen the video. Rico acted proud, said it was great marketing. My boss gave a forced smile, said we should keep things professional moving forward. I nodded, pretending I didn't feel my stomach twist. At lunch, I scrolled through Ethan's social media. He hadn't posted anything, but his profile photo was gone. Just blank grey. That night, when I got home, the house lights were dim. His suitcase was by the door. My heart stuttered. I said, "Going somewhere?" He said, "Not yet." I asked, "Then why pack?" He said, "Habit." I laughed nervously, asked if he was serious. He said, "You'll know when I am." I tried to sound strong, told him I wasn't going to be punished for having a life. He said, "You already are. You just haven't noticed yet." He closed the suitcase and walked upstairs. I stood there for a long time, trying to decide whether to cry or call someone. I ended up pouring another glass of wine instead. By midnight, I'd convinced myself he was bluffing. He was too calm, too logical. Men like him don't just walk out, they simmer. I decided to ignore it. I checked my phone again. Rico had messaged, "Next trip, Cabo." I typed maybe, hit send, and turned off the lights. The next morning started wrong, before I even opened my eyes. The house felt colder, like the air had been scrubbed clean of anything familiar. Ethan wasn't in bed, of course, and the guest room door was open for the first time in weeks. The desk was cleared. No folders, no laptop, no printer hum. I checked my phone and found nothing from him. Not even a calendar reminder this time. Just an empty day staring back at me. I walked into the kitchen and found a neat row of envelopes on the counter. My name on one, his on another, and one addressed to Household. I didn't open mine right away. I made coffee first, pretending everything was normal, pretending he was just being methodical again. but the coffee tasted bitter. When I finally tore open the envelope, all it said was, "Dinner at my mother's, 6:30. Please come. We should talk there." The idea of seeing Grace made my stomach twist. She'd always been polite to me, but there was something about her silence that cut deeper than words. I called Hannah for advice. She said maybe it was a good sign, that if he wanted to talk in front of his mother, he wasn't giving up yet. I said it sounded like an ambush. She told me to be calm, to own what I did wrong. I snapped that I hadn't done anything wrong. She said, "Then it shouldn't be hard to say that calmly." The rest of the day passed like static. At work, Rico stopped by my desk, leaning on the divider like always. He asked if Ethan was still giving me the cold shoulder. I said he was fine, just busy. Rico grinned and said, "You're too good for silent types." I laughed weakly. Then he showed me his phone. Another photo from the trip, me in sunglasses, his hand in the frame. I said, "Delete that." He shrugged, said, "Relax, no one cares." But people did care. I'd heard whispers at work all week, little half-jokes that felt heavier each time. By evening, I was shaking before I even parked outside Grace's house. The place looked perfect as always, trimmed hedges, porch light glowing, the smell of something baked drifting through the air. I walked in without knocking. Grace was setting the table, wearing her usual soft cardigan and quiet expression. Ethan sat already, sleeves rolled up, hands folded. He looked calm, detached, like he was in someone else's life. "Thank you for coming," Grace said, pulling out a chair for me. I sat down, feeling suddenly small. She served food as if nothing were wrong. Roast chicken, potatoes, salad, the kind of meal people share when they're trying to remind each other they're still human. We ate mostly in silence. The only sounds were forks and the low hum of the fridge. Finally, Ethan said, "I saw your post yesterday." My throat tightened. I asked, "Which one?" He said, "The one about empowerment." I said it wasn't about us. He said, "Everything you post is about us." Grace looked between us. "Maybe you should listen to each other before talking to strangers," she said softly. Her tone wasn't angry, just disappointed. I told her people online had been supportive. She said, "They're not the ones married to you." I turned to Ethan, desperate for him to show emotion. I asked if he'd forgiven me yet. He said, "For what?" That word hit harder than any argument. I said, "For ignoring you." He said, "You didn't ignore me. You erased me." I tried to joke, said he was getting poetic again. Grace put down her fork. "He's not being poetic, dear. He's being honest." I looked at her, then back at him. I said he'd always wanted me to be honest, and I had been. I hadn't lied about anything. He said, "That's true. You just left out the parts that mattered." I wanted to scream that he was twisting everything, but the air in the room made it impossible. Grace finally stood and said she'd make tea. When she left, I leaned closer to him and whispered, "If you're trying to humiliate me, you're doing a great job." He said, "No, I'm trying to finish quietly." Grace returned with cups and a tray. Ethan thanked her. I couldn't even look up. She sat down and asked gently, "Do you love her?" Ethan said, "I used to." Then she asked, "Do you love him?" I said, "He's my husband." She said, "That's not an answer." I could feel my face burning. I said this was ridiculous, that families fight and make up, that this wasn't the end of the world. Grace nodded slowly. "Maybe not the world," she said, "but maybe the end of the version he lived in." After dinner, Grace gathered the plates. Ethan stood, thanked her again, and told me he'd drive me home. The car ride was silent except for the sound of the turn signal ticking like a metronome. Halfway home, I said I didn't appreciate being cornered in front of his mother. He said, "It wasn't about cornering you, it was about witnesses." My hands went cold. I asked what that meant. He said, "It means no one can say I was cruel." When we pulled into the driveway, I saw that his suitcase was already in the back seat. I said, You planned this. He said, I planned clarity. He carried the suitcase inside, but left it by the door again, like a reminder. That night, I sat on the couch with a glass of wine, trying to convince myself he'd calm down soon. He'd done this before, retreated, reset, returned. He just needed time. But the house felt too ordered. Even his side of the closet looked wrong, half empty. I opened drawers, finding gaps where his things should be. I started crying without meaning to. Then Ava called from my mother's place. Her tiny voice asked when Daddy was coming to pick her up. I said soon. She said, You sound sad. I said, Mommy's just tired. She said, Daddy packed my clothes, very neat. I didn't know what to say. After we hung up, I sat in the dark until my eyes stopped burning. At midnight, I heard Ethan come downstairs. He didn't see me on the couch. He walked into the kitchen, filled a thermos and stood there quietly for a moment. Then he picked up his phone, typed something, and left it face down on the counter. After he went back upstairs, I turned the phone over. It was a reminder set for the next morning. Drop forms, 9:40. The next day, he left before dawn again. I watched from the window as his car pulled out, headlights cutting across the empty street. I tried to tell myself it was just work paperwork, maybe taxes or insurance. But something in my chest told me it wasn't. I spent the morning cleaning the house like a maniac, wiping counters, folding towels, trying to erase the tension with order. When I reached the printer table, I noticed the faint marks of something recently removed. The outline of a folder, the smell of fresh toner. I opened the cabinet. Empty. That evening, Hannah came over unannounced. She said she'd talked to Grace. My heart sank. I asked what Grace said. Hannah just shook her head and said, You need to take this seriously, Lee. I told her I was, that I was trying. She said, You're still pretending it's a game. I told her I didn't need a lecture. She said, Then stop living like you're on one. After she left, I poured another glass of wine and went upstairs. Ethan was in bed, eyes open, staring at the ceiling. I asked if he'd been to work. He said, Sort of. I asked what that meant. He said, You'll see. I laughed nervously, said he was starting to sound like a movie villain. He didn't laugh. Before turning off the light, he said, Tomorrow will be calm, I promise. And something in the way he said calm made me realize calm could be worse than anger. Calm could mean the end. The morning light looked too bright, sharp against the pale walls, almost artificial. Ethan was already up, standing by the dresser, tying his watch strap. He looked calm, freshly shaved, composed in that deliberate way that made my stomach tighten. I asked if he wanted breakfast. He said he'd already eaten. I asked where he was going. He said, To make things official. I frowned, still half asleep. Official how? I asked. He said, You'll see. Then he kissed Ava's framed photo on the nightstand and walked out. I sat there for a long time, staring at the door. I wanted to call Hannah, but I knew what she'd say, that I should apologize before it was too late. The problem was, I didn't know what apology would even work anymore. I hadn't done anything unforgivable, not really, just a few bad choices, a few moments that got too much attention. Everyone online exaggerated everything. I made coffee trying to act normal, but every sound, the spoon clinking, the machine whirring, felt too loud in the silence he'd left behind. On the counter was his mug, clean and upside down, same as always. Mine still had last night's lipstick stain. Next to it, his phone charger was gone. A small space, but it looked like something missing from a puzzle. At work, people were still talking about the Miami posts. My manager called me into her office. She said there had been complaints from clients about unprofessional conduct. I told her they were overreacting. It was a company trip. Everyone had fun. She said the issue wasn't fun, it was optics. She asked if everything was fine at home. I said yes, smiling like it didn't sting. When I walked out, I saw Rico leaning against the water cooler. He grinned and said, "You look tense." I told him about the warning. He said, "They'll forget. They always do." But Ethan wouldn't forget. When I came home that evening, I found him sitting in the living room, laptop closed, hands folded neatly. He said, "Grace invited us for dinner again." I told him I was tired. He said, "You'll want to be there." Grace's house felt colder than before. She greeted me with that polite warmth that hides disappointment. The table was already set for 6, though it was only the 3 of us. I noticed the empty plates waiting, like placeholders for missing people. We ate quietly again. Roast chicken, salad, everything too neat. Halfway through, Grace asked if I'd like more wine. I said yes, maybe too quickly. Ethan didn't drink at all. When the silence stretched too long, I tried to break it. I said I was sorry if things had looked bad online, but people needed to mind their own business. Grace said softly, "Sometimes people only react to what's shown." I said, "Then they should look deeper." Ethan looked at me and said, "I have." I laughed awkwardly, said he was still punishing me for nothing. He said, "It's not punishment, it's preparation." Grace's fork paused mid-air. "Preparation for what?" I asked. He said, "For doing things properly." The words hit like a door closing. I tried to change the subject, asked about Ava's week at her grandmother's. Grace smiled faintly, said she was doing well, very organized for her age. I said, "She gets that from me." Ethan said, "No, she gets that from stability." Grace stood to refill the water jug, giving us space. I leaned closer and whispered, "What are you doing?" He said, "Ending this the right way." I asked if that meant divorce. He said, "That depends on how loud you plan to be." When we left, the drive home felt endless. I tried to reason with him, said we could fix this if we just talked. He said we'd talked enough. I said he was acting like a stranger. He said, "Maybe you never knew me." Back at the house, he grabbed a stack of papers from his briefcase and slid them into a drawer. I reached for it. He gently pushed it shut. "Not yet," he said. I snapped, "You don't get to play mysterious with me." He said, "I'm not playing, I'm protecting." He went upstairs, and I sat on the couch trying to catch my breath. My phone buzzed again. Rico. Did the husband thaw yet? I didn't reply. I didn't even delete it this time. I just stared at the screen until the words blurred. Later that night, I went upstairs. He was in bed reading, calm as ever. I said, "Are you leaving me?" He said, "I'm not running away. I'm setting boundaries." I told him he was overreacting, that normal couples fight and recover. He said, "We're not normal anymore." I lay down beside him, staring at the ceiling. The distance between us felt wider than the ocean I'd just crossed. I whispered, "Do you still love me?" He said, "Love and trust don't share the same house." I turned my back to him, furious, humiliated. He didn't move. When I woke, the bed was empty again. On his side, a folded sheet of paper lay under his watch. It was a list, just bullet points. Car registration, joint account, utilities. Next to each was a neat check mark. My name appeared only once. Beside household communication, done. I crumpled the paper, threw it into the trash. Then I texted him, "We're not done talking." He replied hours later with one line, "We'll handle it properly." That afternoon, Hannah dropped by. She said Grace had called her, worried. I asked why everyone was acting like Ethan was a saint. She said, "Because he's not yelling." I rolled my eyes, said silence doesn't make someone right. She said, "No, but it makes people listen." We sat in the living room, the air thick with unspoken things. She asked if there was anything I hadn't told her. I said no, of course not. She looked at me like she didn't believe me. Then she pointed at the drawer near the printer. "He moved that key off his ring," she said. I opened the drawer, locked. The missing key. I laughed, said he was probably keeping receipts. Hannah said, "Receipts are proof." After she left, I poured another drink and stared at the printer. It blinked softly like an eye that never closed. The faint smell of toner still lingered. I thought about all the little signs I'd ignored, the meetings, the labels, the notes. Every time I called him controlling, he'd been collecting facts. That night, when he came home, I tried to act calm. I told him I'd made dinner. He thanked me, sat down, and ate quietly. Halfway through, I said, "You can stop with the suspense. Whatever you're planning, just say it." He wiped his hands, folded the napkin, and said, "You'll find out soon enough." I slammed my fork down. "You think I'm scared of paperwork?" I said. He looked up, eyes steady. "No," he said. "You're scared of mirrors." I wanted to throw the plate at the wall, but instead, I grabbed my glass and drank until the taste turned metallic. He finished his meal, stood, and said, "Tomorrow you'll have clarity." I laughed bitterly, said, "You sound like a lawyer." He looked at me for a long time before replying, "That's the point." When he went upstairs, I stayed at the table until the candles burned down. My phone buzzed again. Hannah asking if I was okay. I typed, "He says he'll handle it properly." She replied, "That's not a good sign." The house creaked around me, silent except for the ticking of the kitchen clock. I thought about Miami, about the laughter, about how easy it had been to feel important for one weekend. I wanted to believe I could still talk my way out of this, that his calmness was another test. But deep down, I knew the next time he spoke in public, it wouldn't be for a conversation. It would be for closure. The morning started too quiet again, the kind of silence that presses against your skin. Ethan wasn't in bed, and I didn't hear the usual hum of his car outside, only the faint rustle of paper on the kitchen counter. When I went down, the note was there, short and deliberate. "Courthouse, 10 Eid hours. You should come." Nothing else, no signature, no explanation, just that. I stood there holding it, my hand shaking. Courthouse. It sounded serious but also dramatic, something he'd never been before. I told myself he was bluffing. Maybe he just wanted to scare me, force me into apologizing in public. But deep down, I knew he wasn't bluffing. His calm had always been the warning. By the time I got dressed, my heart wouldn't slow down. I chose my best blouse, the one that made me look competent, put together, the kind of woman people believed. I told myself I'd go, talk to him, smooth things over before it became official. He wasn't the type to ruin reputations. He'd listen if I stayed composed. The courthouse was downtown, all grey stone and glass, the kind of place that made you feel small even before walking in. I parked across the street, staring at the double doors. My phone buzzed. Hannah again. "You need to face this head-on," she wrote. "Don't make it worse by pretending." I almost replied that I wasn't pretending, that I was just tired, but what was the point? She'd already decided I was the villain. When I stepped inside, the air was cool, faintly metallic. The sound of heels and echoing voices bounced off the marble walls. Ethan stood near the elevators, talking quietly to a woman in a grey suit. She handed him a folder, nodded once, and walked away. He saw me but didn't smile. "You came," he said. I tried to sound confident when I asked, "What's this about?" He said, "It's time to make things clear." I followed him through a set of glass doors into a lobby where people sat waiting, some with folders, some with children. Everything smelled like coffee and paper. My hands wouldn't stop fidgeting. I wanted to ask him if this was really necessary, but I knew what he'd say, that this was the proper way, the calm way. I'd laughed at that word once. Now it felt like a sentence. He told me to wait by the bench while he spoke to the clerk. I watched him walk, shoulders straight, movements precise. He looked like someone who'd already let go of the part of himself that loved me. When he came back, he held an envelope in his hand. He didn't hand it to me right away. He said, "I want you to understand, this isn't revenge. It's protection." I said, "Protection from what?" He said, from you pretending this never happened. Then he gave me the envelope. It felt heavy, like the paper inside carried more than words. My throat went dry. "What is this?" I asked. He said, "Temporary orders, financial separation, custody outline." Nothing dramatic, just a start. The words blurred together, and for a second, I thought I'd misheard. "You're kidding," I said. He didn't answer. His eyes were steady, his tone careful. "This is how it's done. Quietly. Properly." People nearby turned their heads, sensing the tension. I whispered, "You could have told me privately." He said, "You made it public first." The words hit harder than I expected. My fingers tightened around the envelope. I said, "You don't have to humiliate me like this." He said, "I didn't. You did that yourself." The clerk called his name, and he stepped forward to sign something. My legs felt numb. I sat down, staring at the seal on the envelope, unable to open it. Across the room, a mother hushed her child, a lawyer flipped through a file, and I felt like an intruder in my own life. When he came back, I said, "You really think this will fix anything?" He said, "It's not about fixing, it's about finishing." I wanted to slap the calm out of his voice. I wanted to scream that marriages don't end over missed calls, that he was making a fool of both of us. But I didn't. My words had already done enough damage. Grace arrived then, carrying Ava's backpack. My heart lurched. "Where's she?" I asked. "With Hannah," Grace said softly. "She didn't need to see this." I tried to sound steady, but my voice cracked. "You brought her things? Why?" Grace looked at me with something between pity and exhaustion. "Because you'll need them." Ethan signed one last page, thanked the clerk, and turned back to me. "I'll drop the rest at the house later. You'll have time to review everything." I stood up, shaking, the envelope clutched so tightly it bent at the corners. "So that's it?" I asked. "You're done?" He looked at me for a long moment before saying, "I stopped being your villain the day you stopped being honest." The word stung more than any insult. My face burned, my chest hollowed out. I wanted to cry, but not here, not in front of the strangers watching. Instead, I straightened my shoulders and said, "You'll regret this." He nodded once, not angry, just final. "That's what you said about Miami, too." He walked toward the exit. Grace followed after a pause, giving me one last sad glance before disappearing into the sunlight. I stood there, the sound of my own breathing loud in my ears. The clerk behind the counter cleared his throat gently, like he'd seen this scene 100 times before. I forced a smile and said, "I just need a minute." Outside, the air was blindingly bright. I stepped onto the plaza, the city noise crashing against me all at once. Horns, footsteps, a bus engine. Across the street, Ethan was loading something into Grace's car. A few people stopped to look. Maybe they recognized us from social media. Maybe they just sensed the drama. My phone buzzed again. Messages, notifications, more noise. One from Rico. "You okay? The internet's wild right now." I opened it, then froze. A coworker had posted another video, me in Miami, laughing, Rico behind me, his hand brushing my shoulder. The caption read, "Now it all makes sense." The comments were brutal. I could almost hear the laughter, the judgment, the whispers forming in real time. I turned off the screen and shoved the phone into my purse. Ethan looked back once before getting into the car. Our eyes met for a single heartbeat. Then he closed the door, and that was it. The sound of finality wasn't shouting or slamming, just the soft click of a latch. The car pulled away, leaving me standing there with a shaking hand and a sealed envelope that suddenly felt too heavy to hold. I walked to the bench by the fountain and sat down. The paper inside the envelope rustled as I loosened the flap. Temporary financial separation, custody provisions, signatures neatly aligned. My name, his name, dates, lines, everything clean and organized, just like he'd always been. At the bottom, a line I hadn't noticed. Mutual conduct review, pending social documentation. My stomach turned. He hadn't just prepared, he'd gathered proof. The photos, the posts, the missed calls, all of it now pieces of a record I'd given him myself. I thought about the quiet nights when he'd worked in the guest room, the printer hum, the labels, the new folders, the calendar reminders. I'd mocked it all as obsession. It was strategy. He hadn't yelled, hadn't begged, hadn't cursed. He'd built a case. The water in the fountain shimmered under the sun. I looked down at my reflection and barely recognized the woman staring back. The confident glow I'd chased in Miami had curdled into something hollow. My lipstick looked too bright, my smile too practiced. I wanted to rip the whole version of myself apart. A group of coworkers walked by, whispering. One of them raised a phone slightly, pretending not to record. I turned away, covering my face. My pulse hammered. I imagined the caption they'd write. Wife who went viral meets reality. I almost laughed. Almost. The courthouse doors opened again behind me, and a voice said my name. It was the clerk, holding out a second copy of the paperwork. You'll need to acknowledge receipt, he said politely. I nodded, took the pen from him, and signed where he pointed. My hand shook so badly that the signature wavered. When he walked away, I sat frozen for a long time, staring at the ink as it dried. For once, there was no way to talk my way out of it. No joke, no post, no charm to smooth the edges. Just a fact on paper, stamped and sealed. I wanted to call Ethan, to say something, anything, but I didn't even know what I'd say. Sorry? That word had lost meaning between us. I pulled out my phone, scrolled through our message thread. The last text was from him, 2 days ago. We'll handle it properly. Below that, silence. The plaza began to clear as the afternoon light shifted. I sat there until the shadows stretched long across the pavement. When I finally stood, my legs felt heavy, the envelope still pressed against my chest. People passed without looking, the city moving on like nothing had happened. I took one last look toward the street where Grace's car had vanished. The space it left felt larger than the world itself. I wanted to believe this was temporary, that maybe he'd come back once the anger faded. But I knew Ethan too well. He didn't undo what was properly done. A wind swept across the plaza, lifting the edge of the paperwork in my hands. I caught it before it could fly away. The top page bore the court seal, crisp and final. The sound of the fountain drowned everything else. The traffic, the chatter, even my own breath. I folded the envelope shut, pressed it against my chest, and stood alone in the sunlight, knowing there was no one left to convince but myself.